into press standards. So please join me in welcoming Richard Peppiatt.
Yeah, you did nick my line, but we'll we'll go for another day. Well, first of all, let me say thank you for inviting me, and I'm trying something different today. I'm going to be kind of speaking off of my laptop. I'd like to say paper is because my printer broke, so it's not. So if it jumps around a little bit, it's me trying to work my way. But another date I'm going to mention is last September, and last September I gave a seminar to the Leveson inquiry. Before it all started, there was an invitation went out to sort of to have some people come and speak. And I remember being on holiday in Spain and getting this email saying Lord Justice Leveson would like to request you to come speak to him. And I thought, oh, it's unexpected to be honest, but fine. So I thought that I was turning up. Better. I thought I was turning up to have a small meeting with Lord Justice Leveson and his committee, and turned up to find 100 seats and every editor in Fleet Street and all the executives there to hear my 10-minute speech. And I went, oh, can I really say this in front of them? Can I really say this? And I did it anyway. I went, sod it, I've got nothing else prepared, I'm just going to have to go for the jugular here. And basically the gist of it was saying that, you know, reporters are being used as foot soldiers for proprietors and editors to pursue their own political agendas. There is such a cynical undercurrent behind a lot of, especially tabloid news, that is nothing to do with seeking out the truth, but it's all to do with pursuing certain narratives and certain agendas. After me, there was Trevor Kavanagh, and he called my talk a florid diatribe, I think, and a grotesque caricature of his industry. I think that going forward 6 months, I think I'm probably being a little bit generous to exactly the state of his industry. Now, of course, it's not his industry at all. I think that, you know, people like Trevor Kavanagh, they come from another era when the press did have huge amounts of power. They really did have the ability to completely set the news agenda. They had no need to be transparent. They were unaccountable and in many instances completely above the law as well. And people such as Trevor Kavanagh are absolutely seething that they are now having the spotlight shone upon them. And whatever they may say, that they are happy to be open, they hate it. They absolutely hate it. They literally, even with the revelations that are coming out, do not believe that what has gone on is worthy of the investment in police resources and money that currently is being used, despite what we're facing being possibly the biggest corporate scandal in history in this country. That's how big this could potentially be. But people such as Trevor Kavanagh think we're all wasting our time. Now, the industry, far from his, is really yours. You know, it's a completely different atmosphere that you are entering into. And it's certainly journalism, which has always been almost a one-way discussion, the journalist telling the reader what the news of the day is now becoming far more of a two-way discussion. There are other competing medias, the internet, TV, radio, which have greater levels of trust than newspapers currently do. People are not turning to newspapers to discover the truth. They don't believe what they're reading. And that is a huge crisis. A huge crisis, more than hacking, more than anything else, the fact that people don't believe what they read in newspapers. Tabloids, the tone of them is increasingly out of touch. You know, be it page 3 or even the language they use, you know, people frolicking and whopping this, and it's not how people today speak. It is sort of like this odd throwback to sometime in the 80s. It's never really evolved. And the papers like The Guardian, they are really involving themselves now in social media and the internet, whilst tabloids are giving it lip service. They're not really prepared to have that two-way dialogue. And part of the reason for that is that it's very difficult for them to do so, because what they're doing is not transparent. The stories often don't hold up too much scrutiny. So the minute you have a two-way dialogue, it quickly becomes apparent that what's been printed may not be quite as true as you think. But it's tabloids that I'm going to focus on today, because that was where I worked. I worked at the Daily Star for a couple of years. I worked at the Mail on Sunday for a short time before that, and I've done freelance work for people like the News of the World and the Sun and the Mirror. But I would say that I would not hold up my career by any means as a success story. That's not why I'm here. In fact, I'm the opposite of that, I suppose. Before I reached the age of 30, well, I'm at the tender age of 27, in fact, I've managed to completely implode my career, and you know, I did that on purpose to a degree. But yeah, I suppose that I'm a tale of sometimes some of the mistakes not to make, and certainly, you know, I entered into a culture which I knew deep down there was something wrong with, and wasn't really journalism in its proper sense. But I just went, that's just how it operates. And why should I be the martyr here? Well, you know, if I don't do it, someone else will. It is a very different place, a newsroom, compared to the theory. And certainly, you know, for a good amount of time, I indulged it. I fully took part in some very unethical journalism that involved fabrication and distortion, and I deeply regret some of my behaviour. Tabloids, they aren't all bad at all. Some of the best journalism in this country comes out of tabloid newspapers. But I'm going to argue that the majority of their content is not actually journalistic. It is not journalism. It goes under the banner of journalism because it's in a newspaper. But I don't think that it's actually journalism. It's a modern form of storytelling, is what it is. And its purpose is not to inform, but to entertain. That is its main focus, is to entertain people. And that means that what you're actually trying to do is tap into people's emotions, not their rationality. That's why it's quite provocative and sensationalist. That's always been a part of tabloid output. I suppose crudely, news-informed and comment-entertained. But you've had a fusion now, where the comment and the news are indistinguishable. Where you do not read a tabloid story which is just giving you the information. There is always within that, woven in, a comment, a judgment, telling the reader how they should interpret this information. And often, that's in a provocative manner. If you ask the likes of Chris Jeffries or Rebecca Layton what it's like to be in the crosshairs of a press that is not trying to seek out the truth, but is seeking to entertain, it's a very ugly place to be. They had narratives and storylines built around them that bore no relation to the people that they were, but they were just the characters within almost a movie-like plot line. And this is symptomatic of the way that tabloid journalism has developed. It was the narrative of sort of the creeping oddballs of Hollywood, rather than of real human beings caught in the middle of very traumatic experiences. If you ask a friend, if you've ever met a famous person, often people say, they were never not quite what I thought they were going to be like. They're never quite what I thought they were going to be like. And that's because there is a real separation between the celebrity that you see on the page, which is an image, it's a complete construct, and the actual human being. And that is a separation which the tabloids have created. They've created constructs on top of people in order to sell newspapers. The reference point for all this, it's not the sphere of the real, but I would say it's kind of a hyper-real, is what the narrative is based on. If there's not an individual who's being exploited in this way, when I was at the Daily Star, the sort of chief caricature was Islam. They were the cartoon baddie, of which most ills of the world could be blamed on to create sensational headlines. It was all about tapping in to people's fears and their anxieties. That creates an emotional reaction. That gets people to buy your product. That creates a feeling of bonding with the brand. But it's done in a very cynical way. It's increasingly the case that with A-list celebrities, they're very difficult to access, and they have their own media people who are trying to control this construct around them and their image. And so it is of no surprise that you have TV shows like The Only Way is Essex and docu-soaps like that, which have exploded in popularity, fueled by tabloids who have got right behind them. We have this really curious cultural shift where you have people whose lives are being written by tabloids and by programme makers. They're not just following what they're doing, they're actually creating their own romances, they're creating their lives themselves. You have journalists acting as scriptwriters, and it's a very weird cultural shift, and I don't think it's a particularly healthy one. These constructs and narratives are, whether they be true or not, they are reinforced instantly over the internet, over radio and TV. Newspapers still hold a vast amount of power by the fact that they do set the agenda. And it's very interesting that whether something is true or not, once it becomes repeated on TV and on radio, whether it's true or not becomes irrelevant. Because in fact, by a process of repetition, what is fictional can become fact. And that is something which is relied upon by a tabloid agenda, is that if it is repeated often enough, whatever they say will pretty much become true. It's also worth bearing in mind that the scope of the stories which tabloids cover. Oh, is that yours? That's mine, yeah. That's his phone now. The scope of the stories that tabloids cover is very limited. Sometimes journalists talk about news as if it's something that exists independently of them, as if they just lift up a rock and hey presto, there's the news. Well, it doesn't at all. News doesn't exist without the journalist. And journalists are going out looking for very narrowly defined types of stories, very narrowly defined, that fit within certain frameworks. There's millions of stories out there every single day that don't fit within the right frameworks and never see the light of day. And these frameworks tend to, rather than challenge the status quo, reinforce it. At the Leveson inquiry, you've had editors freely admit that there's collusion between celebrities and newspapers, and I can second that. There is probably not as much as some of the editors have liked to use it as a defence, saying, well, they can't complain about their privacy being invaded because they collude with us. Well, I would say there is a certain type of celebrity who colludes with the press. They tend to be the famous for being famous type of celebrities. They do collude. But you can't just stick all celebrities within that bracket. It's convenient for tabloid newspapers to say that everyone who's in the public eye is a celebrity and everything about their life is digestible. But that's not how all celebrities operate. And in fact, there are a lot of celebrities who do shun the limelight as much as they can outside the remit of their job. Someone like Hugh Grant, you know, he came up with a very good phrase that I like to repeat. It's that he has to do, as part of his movies, you know, photo calls and interviews. And he sees that as a transaction. I've sold you some milk. That does not mean that you can kick in my back door forevermore, go into my fridge and take my milk because I sold it to you once. That's certainly an argument that I would have, a couple of years ago, dismissed as absolute codswallop. But I believe it. I think it's true. I can completely see that. As part of being a celebrity, it is a job. And why should newspapers try and profit off the back of something like that, necessarily? Now, there is this admittal of collusion, and I'll give you a scenario. Say you've got Imogen Thomas of Ryan Giggs fame. I think we can say that now. She is seen coming out of a health spa. And her agent, Max Clifford, happens to represent that health spa. Max Clifford has called up a photographic agency. You've got a paparazzi waiting for her to come out. Pictures are taken. They are sent to the Daily Mail online news desk. They then write a story saying Imogen Thomas may be stressed. She may be nearing a breakdown. She's gone to a health spa. Max Clifford's client, the health spa, pays him because he's given them their brand a big boost. Imogen Thomas has got the publicity she wants. Newspapers have got a cheap story to fill some space. But where's the reader in all this? There's no declaration that this isn't true. None of this is actually true. It's a story. It's not journalism. It's just a story that's been created to entertain. There is no value in it as a journalistic enterprise. But this goes on. You only have to look down the right-hand side of the Daily Mail website, as I'm sure many of you probably do because it's hard to resist. And it's full of exactly that sort of stuff. It's not journalistic. But we call it journalism because it's printed in a newspaper or printed on a newspaper website. And I think that there is a real split there. And I think it's causing big issues. It's very hard to argue that what the Daily Star does is comparable to what the Guardian does. I make no value judgment there, but they're completely different in what they're trying to do. And if you're trying to put them under one form of regulation, pretending that they both have the same agendas, you're never going to get very far. There's one other thing that, while I'm on the subject, well, not on the subject, I suppose, freedom of expression. It's a phrase that has been thrown out at Leveson so many times by tabloid figures to defend their trade. Freedom of expression. I would be very, very wary when you hear that phrase and wonder exactly what it means and why it's coming out of certain mouths. What freedom of expression really means when it comes out of a tabloid executive's mouth is the freedom to say whatever the hell they want because they have the megaphone. They can shout a lot louder than everyone else. And that also means the freedom to shut down opposing viewpoints. Take the example of Professor David Nutt, who released a scientific study that found that ecstasy may be safer than alcohol. This was not his view, it was a scientific study. The Daily Mail and The Sun did not like this because it went against what they believed. And so they put a lot of pressure on the government. They ran really monstering articles about him. They printed pictures of his children allegedly drinking and smoking weed. which they weren't, and it destroyed his career. This is the freedom of expression that they talk about. It's freedom of expression as long as they are the ones speaking. There is also two types of freedom of expression. I'm not going to claim this to be my own idea. Baroness O'Neill is a philosopher who did a lecture last year at the Reuters Institute, and she mentioned this idea that stuck with me. I thought it was brilliant. There's a difference between personal freedom of expression, personal freedom of speech, which is something which we should all defend to the death, the right to say our own personal opinions, whatever they may be. And then there's corporate freedom of speech, which is what Paul Dacre says he will die in a ditch for Janoir's right to attack the lifestyle of Stephen Gately when his body is not even in the ground. That's corporate freedom of speech. That is being provocative because it sells papers. That is trying to make money off the back of deliberately being provocative and nasty. If Paul Dacre will die in a ditch for that, I will happily dig the ditch. Now I'm going to read a little something because I think that this sums up better than I ever could the sort of tone of our mass media at the moment. And it's by a guy called George Saunders, and it's an essay of his called The Brain Dead Megaphone. In it, he sort of imagines a guy turning up at a dinner party with a megaphone, and while everyone's having canapes and drinking champagne, and just dominating the conversation. I'll just read you a little section. Megaphone guy is a storyteller, but his stories are not so good. Or rather, his stories are limited. His stories have not had time to gestate. They go out too fast and to too broad an audience. Storytelling is a language-rich enterprise, but Megaphone Guy does not have time to generate powerful language. The best stories proceed from a mysterious truth-seeking impulse of a narrative that has been revised extensively. They are complex and baffling and ambiguous. They tend to make us slower to act rather than quicker. They make us more humble, cause us to empathise with people we don't know, because they help us to imagine these people. And when we imagine them to be much like us. If the story is poor, or has an agenda, or has come out of a paucity of imagination, or is rushed, we imagine these people as essentially unlike us, unknowable, inconvertible. In surrendering our mass storytelling function to entities whose first priority is profit, we make a dangerous concession. Tell us, we say, as much truth as you can while still making money. This is not the same as asking, tell us the truth. And I think that really does sum up the position that we find ourselves in, is that we have a press that believes it has a right in and of itself to survive, in and of itself, that it can carry on acting in a way that it claims to be in the public interest and it's doing us a favour. When in fact, when you look a little bit deeper, there is, it's not quite the case. It's often quite undermining to our society. You have tabloid editors acting as moral arbiters of society. They are deciding what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what is wrong, what is right. I'll use a story that was told to me by Max Mosley, who, and I think this is rather amusing. He said to me, Paul Dacre accused him of unimaginable depravity in the expose in the News of the World. Unimaginable depravity. And Max Mosley turned around and said, what exactly is imaginable depravity? And I think that makes a very good point, is that why should Paul Dacre decide what sexually is acceptable and not acceptable? No one's ever voted Paul Dacre in to government. Paul Dacre is a man who gets paid millions of pounds a year in a private company, but holds vast, vast amounts of power. And I like to think that people are waking up to the fact that these private companies are consumed by self-interest, not public interest. Journalism proper is a public interest exercise. But when you try mixing that with capitalism that is innately founded on self-interest, you do have a rather jarring juxtaposition. It is an issue. You lot, I suppose, are the next generation, are going to go out there. And, you know, people often ask me, would you say, don't work for tabloids? And I would say, no. If that's what you want to do, do work for tabloids. Go out there and be a better journalist than I was. Stand your ground. Hopefully, by the time you are working, there will be a new sort of regulatory body which will give you some protection. The ability to say, no, that's not how I'm allowed to do things. I very much hope so, that will be in place. But I suppose if I could wind back the clock, that's exactly what I would do, is stand my ground and not allow myself to do some of the things that I did. Because for the sake of, you know, a few days' pay or your job, it's a lot harder to keep having to look yourself in the mirror when you get home. And that takes a long time to sort of repair. And I would just say, you're much better off in the long run to stick to your principles than sell them down the river for your career. I will wind it up there and we'll do some questions, shall we?
How do you feel the tabloids covered the London riots? And do you believe that there was a lot of demonisation of certain demographics?
Well, I think off the bat, you know, we talk about narratives being set up. Instantly, knee-jerk, right. We're seeing a lot of black faces, we're seeing a lot of working class people, and so, without there being any real information that it's a breaking story, very quickly the narrative develops into this is an issue of working class, feral youth. There was an article written by Max Hastings in the Mail, where he described the rioters as animals and less than human. The amount of animal metaphors he used in this piece was, quite frankly, deeply offensive. It very much had tones of racism in it, that it was comparing what were mainly black people to animals who needed to be caged. And, you know, yet again, this is the freedom of speech that Paul Dacre is so keen to protect.
Why do you think the tabloids or any newspaper averted away from the underlying cause of the riot? Why do you think that they went straight away?
Well, this is part of the problem, and I think that often there's this accusation of arrogance on behalf of the Guardianistas. How dare you tell people what they can and can't read? How dare you tell the working class what papers to read? And I think the arrogance is on the other side. The arrogance is by the tabloids, who think that somehow, because it's mainly working class readers, they can't handle an argument that's got more than a black and white. It's all so reduced to here's right, here's wrong. And I think that's arrogance, that somehow people can't handle a serious discussion on underlying issues. And this is why I say it's anti-democratic. It undermines our society, because we can't have proper discussions about really important social issues without tabloids trying to reframe the discussion in the terms that suit them. And that's why they can become quite an insidious force. And certainly, you know, phone hacking, as bad as it is, I don't think that's the main issue that we're facing. I think that it's trying to rein in some of those excesses.
Can you just wait for the microphone? Sorry.
What did you find out about Richard Desmond that you didn't already know about him before you started the Daily Star?
I didn't have any dealings with Richard Desmond. I shared a lift with him once. That was about as... No, I'll tell a lie. I did see him another time as well, actually, on the newsroom floor when I was on the news desk one evening. And he came down, he was flicking through the paper and went, "Shit, fucking shit, 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 shit." And that was pretty much all. The only words I ever heard him utter in person was the words "fucking shit." So, you know, I didn't join the company going, "I want to work for Richard Desmond." You know, I knew he was, you know, known to be a twat. You will find, entering the industry, opportunities are tough to come by. And you have to make a decision, I suppose, when opportunity arises. Do you go, "Well, I'm going to stick, I don't want to work for them, you know, I'm going to stick, that's not for me." Well, you can take that route. And certainly I think, if I could wind back the clock, what I'd have done, instead of, I said to myself, "Look, I'm a working class lad, you know, there's no way anyone like the Guardian or the Independent are going to want to hire me." I didn't go to Oxbridge. And I just said, you know, I'll have a better chance on tabloids. And that's what I did. I think I know now that's not the case. I think that if I could wind back the clock, I would have picked where I wanted to work and I would have harassed them. I would have been on them, sort of, you know, saying, "Give me some work experience," pitching stories, and make it really clear that's where you want to work, rather than going, "I'll give up, I'll just do whatever I can get," and ending up in a rather a mess, as certainly I ended up in the end. So yeah, even got some career advice in there.
Was there anything that changed dramatically at the Daily Star while you were there, which made you come out so publicly about resigning?
Yeah, there was a real sort of... The Daily Star was always a right-wing tabloid, and certainly immigration and Muslims were a particular topic, a hot topic for the paper, to say the least, always framed in very negative terms. And I was never comfortable writing it, but I did. I even went out dressed in a burqa once for the paper, which must be my most shameful moment as a human being, let alone a journalist. But there was certainly a real lurch to the right in sort of January, February of last year, when the English Defence League was sort of growing in support, and the Daily Star started running stories that were very unambiguously positive towards them. And you know, there was sort of a real feeling in the newsroom that we're not comfortable with this. We sort of felt that they were possibly going to actually throw their support behind the English Defence League. And you know, I remember going down to a rally, down in an English Defence League rally, down in central London, and the minute they found out I was a Daily Star journalist, they grabbed me and put me on there, picked me up, and were saying, "He's one of us." And I went, "What the hell am I doing? How the hell have, you know, I've ended up being sort of held up by these people. They see the Daily Star as their newspaper. I find these people abhorrent." And it certainly for me was something that, you know, I felt rather upset about, and I started formulating the idea I needed to get out. And then there was a front page story where it was completely concocted. It said that the English Defence League was to become a political party. And this story, the news editor had come over and said to the reporter who sat next to me, very good guy, was a very close friend of mine, said to him, "Give Tommy Robertson a call and find out if they want to become a political party." So he did, and Tommy Robertson said, no interest, we just want to ban the Quran. That's all we want to do. It's only a small thing. So he told the news editor, and the news editor went, "Right, anyway." And so we sat there and we'd had a discussion about it. What are you going to do? write anyway. Just thought it would make a little story, ended up being the front page with a very sympathetic editorial that accompanied it, saying, "Do not ignore the EDL, they are speaking for the working classes." And that, for me, was when I decided definitely I was leaving. And not only was I leaving, I was going to do it very publicly as well, because I did know that if I just resigned, someone would come and fill my seat the next day, and nothing would change. I didn't think for 1 minute that me speaking out would change everything. But it was very gratifying that when Dawn Neeson gave evidence to the Leveson inquiry, and she was challenged to show, she said, we have no negativity towards Islam, and she was challenged by Lord Justice Leveson to show some positive stories about Muslims. And a few days later, delivered to the Leveson inquiry was a pack of stories. I have it on good authority, all of those stories were after the date that I left. So maybe something did change. I can't say I read the thing, so.
Before you left, did you actually sort of take up your issues with like the editorial people around you, and was there sort of sympathy towards them, or?
There was a girl whose name I won't mention, who had resigned about 6 months before I did, for precisely because she wasn't happy about the Islamophobia as she saw it. And she had made her feelings very known to the management. She didn't want to write, she at one point complained, I don't want to write this story. And as a result, she was given every sort of Muslim and immigrant bashing story to write for a week. Every single one landed on her desk as punishment. Sod off to the Guardian then, etc. was the tone taken until she was bullied out of her job and she resigned. And you know, I'm ashamed to admit that that cowed me enough to keep my head down. And to, you know, I wish that I had walked out the door with her and shown a bit more backbone. But I didn't. I went, I don't want to end up like her. I better just shut my mouth. You know, companies like the Daily Star, and you know, there is this talk about whistleblowing policies being introduced. I don't really think that they'd work, because although you might not be able to fire someone for blowing the whistle, you can certainly make their life hell in a newsroom. You can put them on 48-hour doorsteps that are going nowhere. You can give them picture captions to write all day. You can certainly make their life miserable without firing them. And certainly at the Daily Star, you know, the only person you could speak to about your concerns would be your direct manager. And often he'd be the person who'd be asking you to do the bloody stories in the first place. You're not going to get very far there, are you? So no, that was pretty much that.
Do you think Desmond, in a sense, is somewhat hypocritical by having his involvement with porn websites, but yet only express news that are supposed to reflect the views of the general public?
Well, thanks for bringing that up. No, completely. Never underestimate just how hypocritical tabloids are, and no more hypocritical than the Desmond stable. Yes, how on earth he can justify being so prurient and so morally outraged by the slightest nipple slip you ever see before the watershed, but then at the same time own big jugs and Asian babes, is beyond me. And I mean, how he looks himself in the mirror and can take himself at all seriously, I don't understand. You know, there is no, you know, these are not positions they take because they actually believe them. This is the interesting thing that you need to remember, is that newspapers often don't sort of take certain positions on certain issues because that's what they truly believe, so much as they think that that plays to the mob, that plays to their readership, that somehow that will boost their sales. And it's a really dangerous thing to do, really, I think. You know, when you are playing up to the mob like that, it tends to incense the mob. And I certainly felt with the Daily Star that when you are writing scare stories about Muslims, I was somewhat responsible if some bloke in Bradford's reading that in the pub and goes, right, I've had enough of these Muslims, that's the final straw for me, now they're blacking out the swimming pools so we can't see in, and, you know, and all of a sudden he goes down to the mosque and throws a brick through the window. And then you've got a race war in the streets. So little things, like a newspaper article written in London, it can have big effects. There is this sort of lack of recognition of the responsibility that goes with being part of a mass circulation newspaper, is that you know, people will use what you write as justification. And if you go on far-right forums, you'll often see articles in the Express, in the Mail, in the Star, in the Sun, which are used as justification for certain racist and bigoted perspectives. This proves what we knew all along. When the journalist writing it knows that the story wasn't true at all. And it's certainly, you know, this is an argument I often have in debates, is, you know, what is exactly truth? You know, people say, well, it's got a bit of spin on it. It's, okay, it's a bit spun. And I say, well, when you spin something, you're misrepresenting the truth. And there'll be journalists who would stand here and they would say, that is not true. We are merely given an interpretation of the truth. Well, that's for you to decide. I would certainly say that when you spin something, you distort it, it no longer is the truth. When you don't make a fair attempt to represent all sides of the triangle, then you're not telling the truth. But there is a contrary argument to that, and I'm sure that there's maybe Chris Tate and etc. would have that one.
Were there actually any positives about working for the tabloid press?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not someone who has some sort of loathing of the tabloid press and object to their whole existence. I don't, because they do some really good journalism. And the sort of difficulty is, and I battle with this, is that newspapers hold this huge amount of power, and often they wield it without responsibility and very unfairly and bully and intimidate with it. But then you have something like the Stephen Lawrence case, in which the Mail, which is a paper that I absolutely loathe, used that power for good. We would not have had men behind bars now, was it not for the Mail using their power for good. So you sort of, you know, you scratch your head and try and work out, you know, if you remove the power, you remove their ability to do good. It is a very difficult issue.
Can I just ask a very quick question? How do you explain the fact that, isn't it sell about 700,000 copies, the Star?
Yeah.
How do you explain the fact that they sell so well? Because that's when I'm arguing against these things, that's an argument that's often put to me.
Well, first of all, you know, my argument to that is you can't let market forces decide morality. You can't just say because something sells well, therefore it's right. That doesn't make any sense. Morality is not a matter of sales. You know, if we had public executions, you get a good crowd. Don't make it right. So, you know, yes, people, when you are 20p helps for a start, but, you know, the Daily Star in particular, and Dawn Neeson, the editor, freely admits this, they overham their stories. They have deeply misleading front pages. I'm trying to think of one. Simon Cowell is dead was one front page while I was there. Dead. Really? Bloody hell. Open the paper, no, he's left X Factor. And that is a standard sort of front page. So, you know, I can never understand why you would buy the Daily Star and read that, and then go back the next day and see a headline and go, oh, bloody hell, I'll get it today. You know, Chilean mine to become theme park. There was another one. Oh, that must be true. But it must be goldfish brains, you know what I mean? Just can't remember the day before and just go and pick it up. Yes, it is one of those things. The public needs to take responsibility. There is a great amount of hypocrisy that the public are outraged when Millie Dowler's phone gets hacked, but weren't that bothered when it was celebrities. I think people kind of have known for a long time that there's maybe something a bit dodgy going on with some of these stories, and but people are prepared to turn a blind eye because they enjoy it. So the public at large, the people who buy these papers, need to take some responsibility for the press we do have. But that does not absolve the newspapers themselves. They don't have to pander to that sort of, to people's basest instincts. Yes, we would all like to stick our eye to the keyhole. It doesn't mean you have to, sit there and guide people in and make 20p off the back of it. That's the issue.
You mentioned Chris Tate earlier, and of course Chris came in to speak to us a couple of days ago, and he said a few pretty eye-opening things, and one of them was that the news of the world does not cause pain, it reports the pain that's already there. It seems to me like possibly he was trying to absolve himself of some responsibility. What do you think about that?
Well, there's an interesting... I think that tabloids in general have moved from a position where they are trying to discover the truth of something, so just reporting on what's said or an event. And I'd say that's sort of like, instead of it's man in the know, it's man in the pub. This is what I heard. It's not about we want to find the truth, the elixir of truth of this information, uncover. We'll just report the gossip, the rumour, whatever passes through. Verifying it as fact is not really on the agenda. So that's one part of that. But there are certainly, sometimes people do feel gratified that they have appeared in newspapers, and that they sometimes find that as a process that helps them. It gives them recognition that their trauma has been recognised by the country as something worth, as something valuable, and that helps them to get over whatever pain they're suffering. But then you completely ignore the vast amount of people who, when you do go knock on their door, when someone in their family's just died, tell you to sod off. They're not interested. In my experience, the vast majority aren't necessarily interested in being in newspapers. And I think it's the Shropshire Star, but there's a story that you can find on the internet about a woman who, after News of the World closed, she writes this lengthy rebuke to David Wooding, who is now the political editor of The Sun on Sunday, who was saying, well, these ethical failures were all something of the past, and the current bunch of journalists were all decent, upstanding people. Her son's girlfriend got stabbed to death, I think it was, and she wrote this lengthy and very moving article, which I would encourage you all to go and seek out, in which she described how within hours of the death she started getting phone calls of people pretending to be PR representatives, wanting to help her out, who turned out to be journalists. She made it very clear he was traumatised and did not want to speak to the press. They were knocking on the door at all hours, turning up at her place of work, turning up at his school, contacting, trying to add him on Facebook, contacting friends of his. And this is after the lad's 16 years old. His girlfriend has just died in horrific circumstances. And it's sort of, certainly in my experience, the individual, that you don't really humanise your target. You have a job to do, and that's to get a story out of them. And you cannot afford to be compassionate about it particularly. You have to be, right, this is what I need to get. You're under immense pressure. You're not allowed not to come back. I didn't want to talk. I remember the Mail on Sunday sent me on a death knock once. And I knocked, they said, no, not interested. They said, go and knock again. I did it again, still not interested. And I thought, I'm not going to knock again. I'm just going to sit here. And I'd sort of call up and say, yeah, I've just given it a knock. And they go, well, give it 10 and go knock again. I didn't. I sat in the car all day. But it was 13 times they would have had me knocking on that door of someone who'd just died in that family before they said, I'll knock it on the head then. It is not about sort of, worrying about the individual. It's about worrying about filling the page. And certainly, I don't really buy into the argument that journalists are doing society a favour by doing some of the stories they do. Although there are occasions when, it does help people.
Do you think the general dumbing down of journalism has led to the general dumbing down of society as well, where people are more interested in the only way is Essex than who's the Prime Minister?
Well, it's a chicken and egg scenario, isn't it? I certainly don't think it's helped by any means. I think that the fact that tabloids are... What worries me the most is not so much what's in papers, but what gets pushed out to make room for a double-page spread about, Mark Wright's latest love. There are so many. When you're sitting in a newsroom, you see the wires, and you see all these, really moving stories from all around the world of really public interest things occurring that will never ever see the light of day, because you've got to write up an interview with Jordan that you've just picked off the top of your head after sort of, stumbling past her in a nightclub. Now, I was a showbiz reporter for a year, and that's pretty much sometimes what big page leads will end up, a drunken half conversation with a glamour model at some London nightclub that you can barely remember and you find written on the back of a beer mat in your back pocket the next day. And that will make a big lead in the paper, whilst a genuine world event that happens not to really be in a country that we care about won't get mentioned at all. So the news values are certainly skewed, and that's why I say, news doesn't exist on its own. News needs the journalist there seeking it out, and it has to fit within certain parameters. And I certainly think, going back to the arrogance argument, the idea that people don't care about these subjects is rubbish. I think that good journalists can make any copy sing. They can go to a farmers' meeting in Brussels and find some angle that would appeal to their audience. But there's no desire within the industry, within the newsroom by the editors, to allow you to do that. They want the easy and the cheapest option.
I think I better make it one last question, because Richard's got to get on a train to Manchester.
Following the publication of your letter, how threatened did you and your family feel?
It was pretty hairy for a while, yeah. Certainly I got death threats, and I can't say a great deal about it because there's ongoing legal action. But yes, I was quite, I didn't expect them to take it lying down. However, I certainly didn't expect that there was going to be the level of sort of threat that I did get to keep my mouth shut. But I'm a stubborn old fool, and it only encouraged me, I must say, that I went, right, well, I'm obviously someone doesn't like what I'm saying, so I'm going to keep saying it, and I'm going to say it even bloody louder, because I thought it was important. And I'm happy to say that, that's all stopped now, and certainly I won't be getting a Christmas card anytime soon, though.
Okay, I'm sorry to bring that to a close, because I know lots of you have got questions, but Richard is doing something for BBC in Manchester at 3:30.
3:30.
So we've got to make
Radio
sure
5 Live if you're knocking about.
So we've got to make sure he gets there on time. That was really interesting.